It began with a spark, a single moment in time that ignited a conflict so vast, so devastating, that it would tear a nation apart. Families divided, friendships shattered, and a country on the brink of destruction. The year was 1861. The United States of America was no longer united. Instead, it stood fractured. Two opposing forces locked in a war, not just of bullets and bayonets, but of ideals, of identity, of the very soul of a nation. But what truly drove this war? Was it about states' rights, economic power, or something far deeper? Something written into the very foundation of the country? To understand the Civil War, we must step into the minds of those who fought it on both sides, see the world through their eyes, and feel the weight of the choices they made. And once you do, you may never see American history the same way again. The roots of conflict. The seeds of war were planted long before the first shot rang out at Fort Sumter. Decades of political tension, economic differences, and moral debates had been building beneath the surface like a ticking time bomb. On one side stood the Union, led by President Abraham Lincoln, fighting for the preservation of the nation and the belief that no man should own another. For them, the Civil War was not just about keeping the United States together, but about defining its very future. Would it remain a land of freedom and opportunity, or would it continue to uphold an institution that chained human beings in servitude? Confederate opening. On the other side, the Confederacy, formed by 11 southern states. Imagine waking up one morning to find that everything you've ever known, your way of life, your traditions, your homeland, is under threat. The world you were raised in, the land your ancestors fought for, the economy that feeds your family, all in danger of being stripped away. For the southern states in 1861, this was their reality. To them, the United States government had overstepped its bounds, dictating how they should live, how they should govern, and what they could and couldn't do with their own land, their own resources. This wasn't just about laws. This was about survival. And so the South made a choice that would lead to the bloodiest conflict in American history, a choice that would change the nation forever. But was the Confederacy fighting for a lost cause or for something more? To truly understand, we must step into their shoes, into their minds, and see the war from their side. Because history is never as simple as heroes and villains. The Confederate cause defending a way of life. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, the South saw it as a direct threat to their existence. They feared that his presidency would bring sweeping changes, restrictions, and ultimately, the end of their economic and social order. To many in the Confederacy, this was not just about slavery, though it was undeniably central to their economy. It was about self-determination, about the right of each state to govern itself without interference from Washington. They saw themselves as following in the footsteps of the Founding Fathers, fighting against tyranny, against a government that no longer represented them. If the North could dictate the terms of their economy, what was to stop them from taking more power, from reshaping the South into something unrecognizable? So 11 states took what they believed was the only logical step. And when Lincoln refused to recognize their independence, when Union forces remained stationed at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the South felt they had no choice but to act. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter, and with that, the war had begun. The Union's purpose, preserving a nation. To truly understand why the Union fought, we must step into the shoes of the soldiers, the leaders, and the ordinary citizens who saw the war as a battle for the soul of the country. In the beginning, Lincoln's primary goal was simple: hold the United States together. The southern states had seceded, declaring themselves a new and independent nation, but Lincoln refused to accept it. To him, and to many in the North, secession was not just unlawful, it was a direct attack on the idea of a unified America. If the Union fell apart, what would stop other states from leaving in the future? What would keep the great American experiment from unraveling into chaos? But as the war dragged on, the Union's purpose evolved. With the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Lincoln made it clear this war was no longer just about unity. It was about ending slavery once and for all. For the thousands of black men who would go on to fight for the Union, this war was not just political, it was personal. They were fighting for their freedom, for their families, for a future where they would no longer be treated as property, but as men. A war of fire and blood. The battles of the Civil War were unlike anything America had ever seen before. This was not a war fought on distant shores. It was in the fields, the towns, and the very backyards of the people people who lived through it. The South knew they were outnumbered. They knew the North had more factories, more railroads, more soldiers, but they also knew they had something the North did not: home field advantage, military leadership, and an unbreakable determination to fight for what they believed was right. They did not need to conquer the North. They only needed to resist long enough to hold their ground, to make the war so costly that the Union would eventually give up. And with generals like Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and J.E.B. Stuart leading the charge, they had every reason to believe they could do it. The battles that defined the South. The Confederacy struck fast and hard. At the First Battle of Bull Run, they shocked the Union with a decisive victory. The North had expected a quick war, one battle, one easy march into Richmond. But the South proved they were more than just farmers with muskets. They were warriors. Then came the Battle of Fredericksburg, where Lee's forces crushed the Union in a stunning display of strategic brilliance. Again and again, the Confederacy proved they could hold their own against a stronger enemy. But war is not won on courage alone. The cracks began to show at Gettysburg. The Confederacy made a desperate push into the North, hoping for a decisive blow. But after 3 brutal days of fighting, they were forced to retreat. From that moment on, the South was on the defensive. And yet, they fought on, because for them, surrender was not an option. A desperate fight for independence. For the Confederate soldier, this was more than just a war, it was personal. Many did not own slaves. Many had never even seen the grand plantations that defined the Southern economy. But they fought because their homes were under attack, because they believed the Union had no right to tell them how to live. As General Lee once said, "It is well that war is so terrible, or we should grow too fond of it," and terrible it was. With each passing year, the South's situation grew more dire. The aftermath, a nation forever changed. The Civil War claimed over 600,000 lives, more than any other conflict in American history. Cities lay in ruins, families were left to grieve, and an entire generation had been shaped by fire and blood. But the Union had prevailed. The United States remained whole, and slavery, once seen as an unshakable institution, was abolished forever. Yet even as the guns fell silent, the wounds of war remained. The Reconstruction era that followed would bring new struggles, new conflicts, and the difficult challenge of healing a nation that had been torn apart. In the years that followed, the South struggled to rebuild, to redefine itself in a country that had changed forever. Reconstruction brought new challenges, new conflicts, and a new battle. Not of muskets and bayonets, but of identity. Closing reflections. The Civil War was more than just a clash of armies. It was a clash of beliefs, of visions for the future of a nation. For the Confederacy, it was a desperate struggle for independence, for self-governance, for what they saw as their way of life. For the Union, it was a fight to preserve the nation, to end slavery, to forge a new path forward. In the end, the war shaped America into what it is today, united, yet forever marked by the scars of its past. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that no matter which side one may see themselves on, history is not just about victory or defeat. It's about understanding, because only through understanding can we truly move forward and learn from the mistakes of our predecessors. If you've made it this far and want to see more videos about history, please comment below a topic for us to cover, because history is never just black and white, and there is always another story waiting to be told. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.